it's very important that you set your ideal first, so you know what the hell you're aiming for. When you look at psychology and this dopaminergic system, which is your reward system, it orientates itself according to your goals. So your emotions are kind of at the mercy of what it is you want from life. And again, so many people don't even know what they want. So their emotions are a mess because they don't know what's good for them. Not even green tea anymore. It's just straight up peppermint because I've got like a caffeine issue that
Hmm.
I like it so much. And then for a long time, I thought, oh, I'll just replace coffee with green tea. And someone was like, there's caffeine in there too. I was like, damn it, everywhere I go. So
Stimulus,
I never,
stimulation
yeah, I
everywhere.
know. And it really speaks to me. I'm always like, oh, let's go, let's go, let's go. I'm running out of time. So yeah. So no, I haven't got to the matchup, but I should. I should. There's a lot. The other thing I want to try is the nootropics
Yeah.
mushroom stuff.
Uh-huh.
But again, it's just at the moment there's so much going on. Like those are fleeting moments of insight that I go, I should do that thing, and then I'm like, anyway, I got to do this thing. So the pile of important things to do at the moment is
Yeah.
high up.
Yeah, it comes down to priorities, right? It's like right now, what is my focus? What's my priority? Is it looking for like more things or
Mm,
bringing in more things, or do I just need to just concentrate on what all these things
definitely,
I have in front of me, right?
definitely not that. I heard an interesting lecture of Jordan Peterson, one of his really early ones in his psychology classes. It's interesting watching back his old lectures.
Yeah.
I call it poor Peterson because like his suits are terrible. Like they're kind of ill-fitting. He's kind of a little bit out of shape because he hasn't gone on the carnivore diet too. He's still struggling with autoimmune, but the content is just as good, if not better, because it's not politically loaded at all. It's just his
Mm.
lectures about uh, there's lots. There's the biblical series, but the one that he has is like his psychology course at uni at Toronto University. It's amazing, but he speaks about the problem with people that are open. People that are open generally tend to be quite intelligent, and they can grasp many concepts. But the problem is that makes them pliable to a lot of different things, and then they have a hard time choosing and mastering anything because everything interests you. And I sit in that category massively. Like I'll be reading someone going like, "That's amazing! I want to know everything about that all at once." And then someone will begin like handstands or rope dart, and we're like, "That is amazing! I'd like to learn that too." And then you're like, when are you going to do all of these things? So that's something I'm trying to recently more so than ever is trying to streamline
Yeah.
everything to sharpen the thing that I'm going to be. And it can be a broad concept, but you still want to sharpen what that is, which is kind of how I ended up with more
Mm.
of what I'm doing now, because you can bring in influence from other places. I've been using this second brain technology quite well. I mean, it makes it sound a lot more advanced than it is. This idea of storing information you've learned from all these different sources and then finding your own unique combination between those things, and I
Sure.
think that's where true creativity comes in, is when you can keep those influences.
Yeah.
Like I might be watching a video about cats because I have a cat, and I'm very interested in training it. And in amongst that, you'll find the psychology of behavioralism and how very similar to cats we are, and actually how there was these experiments they used on cats, which are kind of sad with kittens, but they used to stitch their eyes closed when they were developing. And what that does is you would think it would just disrupt how they see, but it doesn't disrupt actually how they think, because your visual cortex has these 5 layers. And if one eye dominates, it's quite beautiful that the visual cortex is like interwoven like that, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. What happens is, due to a thing called Hebbian plasticity, if just the right eye is dominant, these little channels that should be for the left eye get completely overrun by the right. And it actually disrupts how your brain functions. Now, there was a way that during the critical period, you could blind the cat completely by putting it in the dark and open up this eye. And then the stimulant is the same, or stimuli is rather the same for both eyes. So they come, there's some harmony. But it was super interesting to like go from wanting to train my cat to give me like boop to like, what the hell's going on over here? They were stitching cats' eyes closed. So that's a classic example of how things can get out of hand for me if I let it. And of course, with the internet now, you're like,
Yeah. Well,
no limit, man.
do you think this is our primal brains, our primal wirings, is that more of a primal natural way of being? Like, we are generalists, we are general movers. That's how we
Mm.
that's how we were in the wild. We had all these kind of facets to ourselves, like we can shapeshift so
Mm.
easily, can't we? And that's what I found in the movement space. It's like, yeah, we are generalists. When we specialize in something, often the body has issues, problems later on. It's like, yeah, you find that in all areas of
Yeah.
sports and athletics and stuff. But it's interesting when you view it through that lens. Like, we are generalist movers, and then I apply that to being interested, being a multi-potentialite. The TED
Mm.
Talk multi-potentialite speaks to that is perhaps, it seems to be for me, that's a natural way of being. But then I would agree that, and this is where I'm at, and maybe unconsciously, that on some level, this is why I love like talking to you and speaking to you. Like, I see that in you. I see this side of you that is so passionate about so many different things, and learning and different modalities and bringing them in and helping them complement each other, rather than just sticking to one thing. But then there's so much merit in doing that, and as you can feel into, and as you just spoke to,
Yeah.
it's so much merit,
It's
mastery, right? And yeah,
mm,
the Bruce Lee method almost that you spoke to as well.
it's I never heard it put like that, that we are generalists. I never heard that, but that does make sense, and certainly that speaks to me. Um, but then sometimes I do think, if I want to be really good at something,
Yeah.
have I missed the potential? I'm actually watching a really cool documentary about a American football guy, and like his dad just had him at like 9 years old, like just studying how he runs, how he moves, all these things. And I'm like, I'm almost 40 now, and like that window for becoming physically really proficient in something, that window, as far as I'm concerned, is pretty much gone for many things that are hard on the body. That's gone, and with that came quite a bit of grief. Like, without knowing, it kind of exhibited itself in anger and frustration and resentment in many ways for me. This idea that all the stuff that I used to want to do all the time, my body is now holding me back. And come to a realization that I'll never be a world class gymnast. I knew that when I started anyway, but that I even if I want to start now and do nothing else but that, I could not be that. You know, so that is tough. But then I guess with the brain, what's so interesting is that longevity, that capacity is far longer lasting. And in fact, a lot of what you've conceptualized and what you've learned until now is building blocks. Whereas as a body, you may get, you know, decrepit over time, for lack of a better word. The brain at this age is actually in a pretty good place in terms of thinking uh, and having experience. So that's at least a positive of this idea of being a generalist in terms of thinking instead of just the body.
Hmm. So, what are you most focused on? What are you spending most of your time doing now? So, calling in that kind of deep
Mhm.
work in one area. Um, what's that for you? What's that look like?
For me now, it is at the very top of that would be mental health, like understanding mental health, and under that umbrella, I guess, would be how the brain works on a physical, biological, neurochemical level, and then understanding how people interpret what their brain does and vice versa, how what they think and do then affects their brain, including how they eat. But at the top of that is the mental health, and then amongst all of that has been very much how do these things and the evolution of those things affect males in particular. This has been a very interesting time for me. Like I've mentioned my age already. I'm almost 40 now, and there's a lot of differences, and I've just been forever reminded of the adage or quote. I'm not sure if it's a well known who said it, but youth is wasted on the young. And at every juncture in my life, I'm like, oh yeah, I did have it. I had it real good, but it takes to be in the next stage to appreciate that last stage even more. So in amongst that, there's been this midlife malaise that I felt to some degree, but for the first time, I became aware of a lot of friends of mine that I work with actually being diagnosed with depression. and becoming more and more aware that I'm like, things get harder. Things get harder at this age, and it's a simple case that there's more responsibilities get piled onto you. And like with anything, as the pressure starts to come down, you start to notice where the cracks are, whereas you may have not noticed before. You know, when most of my life was going to work and then partying on the weekend, there's not a lot of pressure testing there. So you can get away with all manner of problems, but until you have a little bit more pressure, a little bit more responsibility, you start to know where the cracks are. And I thought that's so interesting, and that put me on this journey of thinking about what a man is and how to conceptualize being a man, and is this just part of that? And as I got through this, I came across hero's journey, as well as this death of the hero, how the boy must die, uh, the kind of Peter Pan syndrome, and all these things just like spoke to me as if they was written directly for me. I thought, this is so interesting. I live in a society, but also a career where we are that. Like we tend to live a very young lifestyle as stunt guys. We get to travel a lot, we get to work. There's not a lot of responsibility brought onto us for the work unless you're up on that next level. So you get to hang out with the boys. You just get to chill out with the boys for a long time, and you can avoid adulthood for a long time, and I probably to a large part did, but to no greater degree of contentment. And that's where all this work and all the study of all of this came in. So I guess it started with me questioning how I'm feeling, to then broadening out what is mental health, and is this normal? Because that's always a question for so many people is, does anyone else feel like this? I mean, the reason certain movies are so popular or songs are so popular is that someone is saying something pretty broad, but you feel like it's written for you. Like that's the connection. That's what makes it so popular. And that's that relief that, hey, someone else went through this. And if they went through it and they're okay, I can be okay, because as humans, I think we recognize that in each other. We're very similar.
Yeah. Guy Ritchie's films speak to that.
Mm-hmm.
Like this hidden, almost taken from mythology, and a lot of the narratives that are these archetypes. And then even in religious stories like the parable son or whatever it is, they do speak to us as an audience, and we're contextual beings, right? Everything in context. And when we see that being demonstrated with like subtle subliminal messages, we do just feel it. That's the power of film. I'm sure as you've experienced.
It
right?
is. And furthermore, it's the power of story. And
Yeah.
as another weird segue, I'm writing my exam this weekend for my module on psychosis and schizophrenia. And one of the questions was, why is it that schizophrenics auditory hallucinations is the most common type of hallucination? So visual hallucinations are quite unusual. You can get them, especially in psychosis, through substance use psychosis like LSD trips or ayahuasca. And some people with psychotic events will have visual, but very few. Auditory hallucinations by far the most popular. And the theory behind it is why.
So hearing voices.
Said, well, hearing, sorry, yes.
Yeah,
hearing
yeah,
voices.
yeah.
Well, because the thing that is spontaneously developed the most out of your senses is speaking, is making words. Like we think in language. That is the part of the brain that is continually firing, because we conceptualize the word through language. Another segue, you don't hear about it anymore, but the feral kids that they found, and I mean that not in like a derogatory way, but in a literal way, the kids that they found that were left not raised by humans. There was the wolf boy of Averon, I think it was, the wild boy of Averon rather. There was another kid found in an attic, and anyone that doesn't take language on through this critical period when the Broca's area of the brain's developing, if you don't develop language, you'll think, sure, you're not going to know language, whatever. You can still conceptualize things. No. Your cognitive ability is flawed. And you think, wow, that's so interesting, because you think something like maths isn't language, right? And yet, you need that as a building block. You need that as any higher order conceptualization, any abstract idea, any planning, for a large part, takes this idea of thinking in language. In chimpanzees, as our closest relative, if you get them in front of a screen like we're looking at now, you give them 3 numbers that they have to tap in order as they come up. we are on par with them in a 0.5 second shining. So they'll 0.5 seconds, you see the numbers pop, pop, pop. Okay, cool. You extend that, okay, we're on par. You extend that to 30 numbers, 0.5 a second. They can still do it. And we're like, it actually makes you worse than where you were with less numbers, you know? You get even worse scores. And they call this the cognitive trade-off, which is that for chimpanzees, what was very important was to be able to see the number of invading troop and knowing if they're outnumbered or not. Do we fight or do we get out of here? We don't need that. But when we came down from the trees, we were completely exposed. So now teamwork became very important. And amongst teamwork, that only works if you have language. You know, that's the Tower of Babel all over. You need to have good communication amongst each other. And that's the trade-off. And that was found to be the same part of the brain that allows them to do that, allows us to speak. That's at Broca's and Wernicke's area. So super interesting. Stories are like at the heart of not just how we socially interact, but our very biology.
Yeah, we live our lives through story. That's literally it, isn't it? We live through story. There's no other way. And did you listen to Huberman? I'm sure you did. Huberman and Jesus, his name is escaping me.
Tell me
the movement guy. You know,
Ido Portal?
Yes, God.
Oh, I didn't. That sounds like
Did you not?
a great one. No.
Oh, wow. Yeah. 4 or 5 times I've listened. Ido doesn't answer questions, and he has an amazing, interesting, for me, way of communicating. And it's in that he speaks to communication and what gets lost and what he is almost trying to regain. And I feel has been a lot of his work is to not conceptualize too much and not lose the knowledge or the wisdom, not lose that through talking to it, you know, trying to so carefully define what he's doing without defining it. Because there's so much within, honestly, it's a phenomenal podcast.
Now maybe you can just go on. Sorry.
Yeah. So one of the things he spoke to, I'm sure Huberman asks about if someone grew up without language, like what the difference would have been or what they'd have been unable to do. And I think feral children is something, I've got a few books on savage girls and wild boys, I think it's called. Yeah. I'm so fascinated with feral children because I just think, like, what can we learn there? Like, what is consciousness if it's not somewhat learned through communication, you know, like the awareness that we have reflected in each other, and through that, how do we even know who we are, like through others? And it just opens the doors to perception and reality and what we actually think is capable of possible.
That's a really interesting question, you know, because of course you need some sort of language to communicate with them, to ask them about their experience, but because they lack that faculty to do it, now you're kind of you have to think.
It's the antennae, it's the radio frequency, and it's so interesting concept about consciousness that we tune into to something, but we have to align the tuner, like the signal. Where the signal's out there, it's almost, that's what that concept's so fascinating. The signal's there, but we have to be in alignment. And this speaks to yogic wisdom and stuff of like tuning the body and like coming into a state of alignment to then be able to pick up a heightened state, a higher awareness, or tap into that higher consciousness by like centering the body. And it's quite fascinating because if we don't do that and we let our body become closed and depressed, and we lose certain abilities to even think a certain way or think higher, or what we'd say is higher, but you know, it's just thinking outside and being more open as a human. Like, our body really, power postures, if you come across that study, like phenomenal study about people and really embodying certain postures, you know, act powerful, and they measured brain waves in that, and it just speaks to exactly what they're doing. So I think that'll be a heavy serotonin release of that shape, so that bidirectional channel. But the reason I was just going to interject there earlier with Ido is I haven't seen a lot of his stuff, but every time I see him speak,
it always reminded me of Bruce Lee, and I might be wrong, but there's always some sort of like analogy, or there's some sort of fable
Yeah,
that he's
elusiveness.
telling. Yeah, and you're like, where are we going with this? And then he brings it around. You're like, oh damn, and it sticks in your brain, right? But
Yeah,
one, because it's unusual, uh, and then two, because there's a there's a magic in weaving something out of nothing. So you asked me a question directly about my life, and instead of telling you who I am, I tell you about
hmm,
the raven in Iceland, and you're like, what? Like, it shocks you, right? Like, you're like, what's happening? And so it makes you concentrate. It's a genius way of getting someone involved. There's a reason, you know, the meerkats are the characters in front of Compare the Market.
hmm.
They know that if they put something unusual with something quite boring, which is comparing insurance, you put those things together, your brain tends to remember them. It's like
Mm.
the concept behind memory palaces and things like that. Take things that aren't normally together, put them together, and you can take advantage of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
So
it
yeah.
shatters your own story of what you expect as well. Like our expectations just are like, whoa, I've just asked you a question. I'm pretty sure I know what you're going to say or how you're going to
Mm,
say it.
mm,
But it is, you think of any wise elder and they'll be talking to you in myth and speaking about story
mm.
and answering questions in that way. And it's a phenomenal way of communicating. I was just obviously at my men's weekend, which I'm sure we'll talk about on every podcast for the next,
Please.
for the foreseeable, but
The video was amazing, man. I was watching it going like, oh
yeah,
my goodness,
I
it
mean,
all happened.
it's easy to, I mean, it wasn't easy to capture the footage. Like that was something that I know is important, but then like the work is happening and we can capture the physical side of things, but as me and you both know, it's like, they're the gateways and ways in for some people. And what I think is the most powerful work is what happens outside of that and what happens in the little exercises and the emotion that we speak to, sitting with, that we will both agree that our culture has somewhat disempowered men to even go there, and it's that story that is for me really important to rewrite and
Mm,
to rewire almost to speak to that emotional body that needs understanding because there's lots there's lots of rye there. But yeah,
mm.
Jeff Shub came to do some facilitating as well, and he just is. I was noticing this in him, and I was like, wow, like the distance between his words and the directness of his words. And I was like, I go off and I'm here there speaking, and I'm like, well, that's another story for another time. But this is it, and I'm like, talking a lot. But it is, and this is the same with like writing letters or writing an email. I've always said, if I had more time, this would be a lot shorter because it's like getting things down into a real precise, direct way, and often that's wisdom, right? It's like, how
Mm.
do I say what I want to say without saying too much?
Yeah. And I think there's a confidence to some degree too, but also people have their different styles,
Yeah,
and
for sure.
you can't fault your style. You don't want to become something else that's not true to you either. Um, it's funny, again, Peterson talks a lot about how writing is a very pure form of thinking.
Mm,
And as you write, you really have to formulate what you're going to say. And there's a lot that goes into it, the language you use. With this course that with my master's for the last 2 years, well, this is going into my second year,
hmm.
you write these essays and they really give you small word counts, which, when you first get to uni, you're like, you get a small word count. You're like, yes. Now you're like, how am I going to fit this in? And then, but do we talk about that, or is that theory? Oh, I don't know. Like, you end up like really having to be so concise, and it's not pretty. It's like they are dry. And it's funny you bring up Huberman. Huberman I always find interesting because he listens to the podcast when he's on his own. And that guy is like, I look up to him because I feel like I've got a similar brain. He can't help but tell you everything. He'll say, look, dopamine is important. Dopamine, people think it's to make you feel good. It's actually not. It's like a reward center. Actually, it's also in movement, and people know that in the striatum. And you're like, actually, that's not important. And he's like, it's
Yeah,
dry when you listen to it. It's so much information without the space. So speaking about your friend facilitating, sharp, it's very interesting that he puts these spaces in. And this is the concept behind meditation too, is where is your time to think?
Mm.
Where's your time to course correct if you're non-stop? Where's that time for anyone to think about what's just happened? And what I've certainly found too is that the same idea that we're talking about to start this podcast about being open and having lots of information and access to lots of information. What do you do then if you're only consuming information? There's no breaks. There's another YouTube video, there's another podcast, there's another book. And in fact, what's happening then is you just are regurgitating what is out there, as opposed to absorbing what you've learned, applying it to your lived experience, and then putting it back out and saying, here's something new. Here's my magician element on top of what I've just learned. And with that, you can approach more people than that content could on its own. And I think that's an important piece of what we should do. It's important to have the time to reflect, but also in our essence for information is putting our own time and effort into thinking about the thing, not just consuming it and regurgitating, but actually stopping and thinking about what it is that we've heard and how that applies to our life, and critically analyze it as opposed to just say what you've heard. How does this fit in with everything else? Does it fit well, or is there something new you can add to it?
Mm-hmm.
And by doing that, can you add value to this literature as opposed to just giving someone what they could have written or read somewhere else?
Yeah, I often caught myself, and this is some feedback I received, and I really felt into this, like having the time where when facilitating, and I would love to talk about how you hold space for men and the upcoming maps of the masculinity that you've somewhat launched. So for me, in that space at the weekend, I was catching myself like, and on to the next thing, and if the next thing was silence, but that's still a thing. It's like, after this experience, can I just sit it that little bit longer? What's the point we transition into the next thing? Because it is what comes up in those silences or in those spaces of, okay, and this is, how do I feel now? What am I processing? Because if you're constantly going from one thing to the next, there's no room for that, as you just so well put. And it's a big one for men, right? It's a big one for men. We're perpetually doing, and it's like be, and it's a different song, and that's what is so subtle, but it can be the change that we need.
I mean, this is I was blown away the first time I was in a men's circle, and they say, you've got 10 minutes to speak. I was like, I talk a lot anyway, but it's so good because the first 2 minutes is maybe pointless stuff, and then you start getting into the time. And it was so interesting that the first week you're kind of getting used to uncomfortability, but then the next week you're like, when someone's quiet, you're like, yes, this is good. This is kind of what you want. When someone says, I don't really know what else, you're like, you do. And if you don't, you're about to know.
Yeah.
But someone shouldn't come in and save you. It's something I started implementing with friends of mine. When I go see them, if I haven't seen them for a while, put out a time, and I'm like, just tell me what, anything you want. Yeah. And it's so nice. Like it's a lot, the lost art of listening to someone.
Yeah. We did an active listening exercise where the other person just listen. It's that, but you're directly facing them, and it's just looking into their eyes, and you're just somewhat not getting any feedback, not getting any validation, like what's happening here with my emotions. Can I continue? And yeah, it's just speaking to what's present, and it's hard when you don't get like the okay from the other person, right?
I say that as I'm nodding while you say it.
Thought you were just
literally doing it. Yeah. Well, yeah.
But it's harder for the other person as well, because you do want to soothe them. You want to make sure that they know you're on board. Or it's a great exercise, it's for sure. But yeah, I'm glad I invited in, which was hard because everyone in this moment, I think it was like lunch on the second day, everyone was really in conversation, and it was great. And then I said, right, we're gonna eat together now. We're gonna eat in silence, and then when you're done, you take some time, and it's silent until you hear the trumpet. I had a trumpet, and they didn't know how long it was going to be, but it was like I was so happy that I went on that kind of gut and intentional piece, because it was very needed for like you think it's we get caught in this, well, that's just nothing, it's just what's it's not productive, and it's so simple, and so if you get it, you get it, and it will feel like, well, no, it's obviously not the case. It's very productive, but that drum needs to get beat over and over again, because a lot of people do just feel that having time in silence is just not achieving anything. Yeah.
I know too well, but that is a lot of kind of my best ideas. And Jung was a big proponent of how your dreams would make these connections where nothing existed, and dreaming is nothing but turning off the prefrontal cortex. And in fact, REM sleep is almost indistinguishable from when you take LSD or you take ayahuasca or DMT. The same process is happening. That prefrontal cortex is what really demarcates us from our closest relatives, is that we have a much bigger, more complex one. So it's interesting. It can control all these base instincts that we have, and it'll decide what stimulus you should be spending most of your effort listening to, and which ones you can suppress, including your emotions, your limbic system. But when you sleep, the prefrontal cortex needs its rest, so it stops. And during your sleep, your dreams are so vivid. Like you have everything's firing off. All the different networks are having a good time, because the prefrontal cortex is like the dad telling everyone to keep quiet. He's out for the night, so it all fires. And in that moment, we get to process things. And dreams are particularly interesting. One, because as we said, how you remember dreams isn't in imagery and just imagery. It's the narrative. You make up the narrative because you piece it together. And in amongst that, there's lots of rich emotions. And what dreams allow us to do is take something that we thought was too traumatic to consciously think about, and put it into a form that is far more palatable. So we can feel the same emotions, and the emotional cortex or the limbic system can start firing and getting what needs to be said out, and we can take it on board, because consciously we can't. And so it's like a little trick of the unconscious mind. You're like, okay, we can't deal with that right now. No problem. We'll get it tonight. And it's an important part, but that comes with the importance of rest. And if you're not getting rest, then you never get to make those connections. You never get to process. It's just like the mail just piles up and you never open it.
That is fascinating. Yeah, we don't talk enough about how we dream, what we dream about, because you're so right. I'm resonating about dreams I've had recently, and it does just, again, context. Oh, it was a dream, so it's not me. It's we don't identify as much as we did if we had this thought about just turning the wheel of the car and heading off a cliff, and you have that thought come in, and you're like, you shame it, and you're like, oh God, why am I thinking this way? This is terrible. It's bad. It's depression. Am I suicidal? Like, what, all these things. Better not speak to anyone about it. They'll think I'm crazy. You have that dream every night, and well, not every night, but you have that dream, and it's kind of like tongue in cheek, and it's like, wow, I murdered you in my sleep. What does that say? Like, and it's just like more allowed, and I guess
it's one step removed, I guess. But I never thought about that either, but you're totally right. What's acceptable that happens in your dream, because people like do separate themselves from like, oh, you wouldn't believe what Dreaming Doug was up to. Like, he was crazy. Me, I'm not like that. But of course, Jung will say that that's your shadow reaching out to you. Freud thought that your unconscious mind didn't know how to tell you things, so it made things quite obscure. And Jung had this belief that the unconscious mind knows what it's saying to you, and it's trying to speak to you as directly as possible. The problem isn't with the encoding of it, it's the problem is with the decoding. You're not listening. Whereas Freud thought it was an encoding problem of the unconscious mind trying to tell you stuff, and it's It's just out there. Whereas Jung was like, no. He's, is trying to be direct as possible. It's telling you by your gut instincts, don't do this, do this, be careful of that.
Yeah.
That is the 2 million-year-old man, as he called. It's your collective unconscious and your private unconscious coming together and going, look, all of the lessons that your primitive ancestors have learnt are with you still now. So heed that. But we don't, of course. We're very individualistic. And this kind of comes back to what you're saying about embodiment practices and getting the body in tune with the other parts. One of the earliest concepts of how the self was divided, there seems to be a trinity that comes up all the time. And Galen was one of the guys that came up with this concept of vapors. And he wasn't really the first. I guess Plato had a similar concept too, which was this idea of your stomach, your chest, and your head. This also been your liver, your heart, and your brain. The same kind of concepts come up, and the idea was that this part here, I can't really show, but your stomach would be your base instincts, what your animalistic drives are. That's what makes us very interesting as humans. We have those drives.
Mm-hmm.
Your chest is then your morals and what you believe, kind of the true essence of you at your best. And then your head was your rational thought. And when you're talking about Ido Portal, you're saying that he wasn't really into being too in your head.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly when you think of things like anxiety and depression, those are problems of thinking too much, and maybe those things get into our body and we feel. So there's this cycle going on.
Mm-hmm.
But for Galen and Plato, the idea was that your chest could tip the balance in either direction. So interesting, when you have these base instincts that want to come out, your morals can override those. Yeah, I want that thing, but no, I can't just take it. But it could also override your brain. I know that's something that makes sense that I should do. However, I'm not going to do it because I believe in something even higher than what rationality is. And morals often pull away in opposite directions to rationality and also to our base instincts. You got monks, pouring petrol on themselves and burning themselves. That doesn't make instinctual sense or rational sense. But the higher order, the chest, is stronger than both of those. But you need to be able to embody that and develop that. Otherwise, you are at the mercy either of your head or your instincts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so powerful. It's a powerful little guidebook. And your sexual energy as well, which is like rooted down there in your belly, in your chest. And it's just, that can override us, like it does. And how much tension is held in these places, tension in any area that we feel like shame around, or we're not able to express what that intuition is telling us because it's been deemed, or we have a story about what the intuition is, or whether I should be more rational about something and more intelligent, or however you want to label it.
We're certainly in a rational, since the Enlightenment, rational is everything, right? The scientific method is everything.
Yeah.
But it comes with its own flaws, There's a famous adage too, which you can't derive an ought from an is. So knowing what things are made out of, what is in their matter, can't tell you what matters. And that is an interesting play on words. Again, Peterson picks up on these, like there's this world that matters and there's things that are made out of matter, but they very much exist in different dimensions. The things that matter to you maybe are completely isolated from what things are made up of in terms of their components.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the matter deriving from the mother.
Exactly.
As well. And patterns. We talked about this on another podcast. Patterns and matter. I've got this friend, and he's launching something called patterns matter. So the patterns we make and the patterns that are that we weave and carve being paternal, and then the matter that makes up it all is like the mother aspect of it all, and it's the integration of those two. Let's transition into the maps of masculinity and what that work is. Yeah, that'll be really cool to speak to you about and to know that what the mission and the vision is around that.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, inspired by everything I went through and realizing that I didn't know what it meant to be a man. I didn't know how my friends knew how to be a man. I was like, oh, what is happening here? And I felt more than that being a man was more and more under attack. And I felt for men because we had this dual problem of being told stereotypically in the past, traditionally, that there's certain thresholds to being a man, and being tough, not crying, not expressing emotions, not being homosexual. There was all these kind of rules about what it meant to be a man growing up. And then on the flip side of this, now in today's age, we've also got another message, which is don't be too manly, because those also have loads of problems, and you don't want to be called toxic masculinity. And I thought, this is tough, man. We are getting squeezed from two different sides, from two different groups. And what was originally called the man box, which is this inability to be manly enough, is now actually being squeezed from both ends. And I thought there was such stark contrast to the feminist movement of the 70s and 80s, which is how do we expand what it means to be female? Like, what are the spaces that we can go into? Can we only be females if we work from home and we're mothers? No, we can do all this other stuff. And that's an amazing expansion. But what we've had with masculinity, maybe from guilt, is this shrinking. And I thought, then you look at the suicide rates, and I don't have the correlation for that, but I felt there's something to this. A lot of men don't feel safe in this world anymore. And to me, that is exemplified by something like that. I also think it's exemplified by the prison numbers and the number of violent crimes that men perpetuate and sexual crimes that men perpetuate. I believe these are different sides of the same coin. It's a lack of direction for men. And a lot of that direction also comes from connection. And that's where this concept of maps to masculinity came from. It was this idea of how do we increase our connection and our direction? Because those things are linked. Where we should be getting our direction from are the elders, the people that have walked that path before, people that can show us a safe way for transferring from a boy to a man. And we don't have that. If you're an absent father, which we have more than ever in so many different demographics, then we're really struggling. We're perpetuating this problem of boy psychology when there should be man psychology. So it really got me interested, and it helped me see my flaws. And getting into the work of Jung and Marie von Franz, which is someone who followed him, who had these lectures at the turn of the century about 1960 to be exact, about these lacks of rites of passages and the lack of real men out there. I thought that's so interesting, and we're farther on now than when she was talking, and it's no better. So the idea was, look, should we look at where the problems are occurring? Firstly in my life, and as I go on this journey, as I try and map out what it means to be a man, I want to document it. And that's what I'm doing, both with the Insta account, but also with a course I put forward, and then this retreat. And I'm sure a lot of listeners, especially guys interested in man work or men work or men's work, will know that the 4 archetypes are something that are great. By no means do I think that is exhaustive, but it's a great starting point. These are archetypes of king, warrior, magician, and lover, just because it gives you something to kind of reflect on. But interwoven in that is stuff that is from Peterson's work, this future authoring and past authoring work, where you just reflect on your life, where you are. You need to know where that starting point is, because you need to know that. You need to know
it's inherent.
You can't orientate yourself in the world without knowing that. And coming back to what we were saying about the lack of time to reflect, I was like, I can't believe how few people know even where they are. And what chance do we have then? And this is a problem. Again, people my kind of age is you're just in it. You're deep in it now. You're deep in your career. You're deep in whatever you're doing. There's no time to think. So I want to give that forum for people to stop, to think, where am I? Where is it that I want to go? And how am I going to get there? And that sounds quite flippant to start with, but you can kind of break that down like you do with everything else. With every other sport I've done, is you break that down into steps. And that's when the archetypes came in, especially the boy archetypes. And the idea then was that these archetypes, instead of just being, they conceptualize as an equilateral triangle, but it could also be an arrow. And these arrows are pointing you towards your ideal. But it's very important that you set your ideal first, so you know what the hell you're aiming for. When you look at psychology and this dopaminergic system, which is your reward system, it orientates itself according to your goals. So your emotions are kind of at the mercy of what it is you want from life. And again, so many people don't even know what they want. So their emotions are a mess because they don't know what's good for them. You know, you can't have this understanding of the world if you don't know what you want. You don't know what actions are good and what's taking you towards it and what's not. I reflected on when I trained to be a stuntman. That's the poorest I've ever been, but it's some of the happiest I've ever been. There was a strict criteria of what I needed to do to become a stuntman. And every day was about ticking things off that list and working towards it. And some days I didn't tick anything off, but I knew I was closer than I was before. And there was a great level of achievement, not in just fulfilling it, but in the process. And it made me think that this is what we need to do for many men. Our masculinity gives us these drives. Our biology is so interesting. Testosterone is so interesting. It'll make us do things above and beyond. It'll make us risk things that our female counterparts won't. That's why we die earlier, because we're willing to take risks. But we've got to harness this energy. And that's the concept of this master masculinity, is that we go through it, go through where you are, go through where you want to be. And through these archetypes, we talk about them and help you reflect on yourself, but also the shadow that's within you, the things and that's probably the harder work, is to know. And for me, the concept of these shadows is like the troughs either side, or maybe a better understanding is the precipice either side your path. That you're getting to the edge where the rocks are falling off, going like, I'm going off piste here, and I should be wary of this. So you have the system where you set up what you want, your emotions get in line as a result, and you start to know where you're working towards. And part of that is journaling work. So every day you're working up, you're thinking about where you want to go and how are you getting there? Because again, life gets in the way and we can get deterred so quickly. So a big part of it is journaling, at least in the course. And as we work through all these archetypes, we get to where you want to go, but also with this self-awareness. And of course, you're course correcting along the way. And I just found with so many of my friends, I would come up with this concept with them and they'll go, I don't really know what I want. But that's the first step. That's where you've got to go. So of course, it draws heavily on Gillette and Moore's work with archetypes, but then through the neuroscience masters, I've started looking at things that are related to each one of those archetypes. How do we develop more of each of those ideals in the boy psychology and then the men's psychology? And then how do we embrace it in a way that we can get what we want and avoid these shadow elements playing into our life? So that's in a nutshell what it is. And course is great because of course you can journal these things out, but I just think there's so much more. There's another element to this, and what I've learned about how males bond. And you spoke a bit about it on your retreat, this face-to-face active listening. We're not very good at that. It makes a lot of us feel very uncomfortable, and that's something we should work on. But something that comes very naturally to us is doing things together, adventures, being shoulder to shoulder. The work on this is very interesting from sociologists, that we like to do stuff. Masculinity is a brotherhood of doing. And evolutionary biology tell us that's because when we were hunting, it was very important that we were together, not necessarily facing each other, because that's not interesting for us. What's interesting is, what is it we need to go do today because people are relying on us? And that's in our biology for millennia now, or 100,000 years at least. And as we're going through this, we like to share what we're doing with each other. We like to have this goal ahead of us. I conceptualized then that I didn't want this retreat to be just about theory. I wanted there to be action. And I thought, because of this element that men like to bond by action. So we'll do the things where we talk and we share, but let's also play to our strengths and do the action. And I thought, as a stuntman, I know a thing or two about action. And I've got a lot of interesting friends. And one such friend is a guy that works in the British Special Forces. So I spoke to him. He said, well, there's a place we can do firearm training. I thought, that's pretty cool. Because when I think about masculinity, that is the firearm. Our biology and our energy and our strength and our size difference makes us a weapon, but also makes us a tool. And the only difference between that is the user. And I thought, if we can get this together and we can learn about masculinity and the experience of being a man, and we can develop these different archetypes, but also we can see this analogy with when you get something that is highly dangerous and you can master it, man, there's a lot you can do. And in that course, we'll also be doing tactician stuff. So it's not just about firing range, it's also about working together to solve our mission, because we're social beings. And one thing that's killing a lot of men is this isolation. So I want us to learn how we can work together, not just in a nice, hey, how you doing, complimentary way, but in a way that we can be very straight with each other and we can be honest with each other and support each other in that role to be the best thing we can be.
Amazing. Yeah, a lot of clarity there. That's going to land for a lot of men. 100%. It is. It's this. For me, it's the cultural story that humans aren't telling the story anymore. It's culture tells the story. That, you know, who doesn't get to decide? It's culture doesn't get to decide who you are. Your parents don't get to decide who you are. Like other corporations don't get to tell you who you are, and that's what's been happening. You get to decide. You get to decide. No one else. You get to feel into all these aspects, and there's no right and wrong, and there's no rules. It's like there's no should be's or whatever. Go on your own journey and find that out, and you speak to all of that. It's phenomenal.
That is that idea of expanding what it means to be a man, right? Like, because I want the men that are masculine, that fall in the part of the brain that Sacha Baron Cohen's cousin has worked so hard to show. You know, he's got these 6 elements of the brain, and he's like, you know, 6% of the women will land on this side, 6% of the men will land on this side. And when we tell men that actually to be a man, it's only about being open, you're like, you neglect this group of guys that aren't like that. And sure, we can develop that, but what about these guys? And then the opposite is true too. The guys that aren't hyper masculine, I want them to come enjoy this retreat, but also I want them to feel like, hey, maybe sports isn't my thing. Maybe the action thing isn't my thing, but I'll do it. But I tell you what I'm good at. I'm emotionally open. And it gives everyone an opportunity. And that's amazing about being human. We can be part of many dominance hierarchies at the same time, but we've got to make them equally all as valuable. We don't want to value one completely and ignore the rest, because it doesn't give the opportunity to our brothers that aren't a certain way. We want all the different types of brothers to have an opportunity to be valued and go, man, your ability to speak or your ability to embody your emotion, that's amazing. You know, and I think what will happen is in this sharing through this retreat, you see that in each other, and people quickly pick up. And they're like, oh, that's a pretty cool concept, because a lot of men will struggle with that. And I think it's empowering to see someone be good at whatever they do. That is that magician magic. You know, you see someone who's proficient at something that does it with ease, and you're like, wow, that's cool. It's inspirational. And like I said, we're social creatures, so we're going to learn from each other. And a big problem is that some of us men are struggling alone, and we only have ourselves to talk to. You know, you're like, oh, am I doing good? I think I'm doing good. But you want those people to rub off on, you know, and learn things from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and trying things out and seeing where you're at in those things, and just being radically honest, not feeling like you're going to let anyone down, or you're just going to feel uncomfortable and that's going to see through, and then people are going to see through you. It's literally just trying these things to just be honest with where you're at. I heard something, I'm sure it was in Chris Ryan's book, Civilized to Death, about this ability to belong to, as humans, different hierarchies. That I think that's a fascinating concept on that, because yes, you can be the leader over here, but then yes, in this circle you can be led, and it's like shifting in those different hierarchies. I think that's really important. That's something that's innate within us, that to have that ability to do that and not feel go on. Yeah,
that comes back to that serotonin release, right?
mm-hmm.
Like, play to your strengths, find things you're good at, and develop skills, because that's going to make you feel better, which is going to make you more open to do things and more confident to do different things. And that magician energy for me just speaks to me so much. Like I say, I'm always enamored by someone like Huberman. Like, he knows his trade so well, and he can wax lyrically about it, you know. And I think in the current climate, this idea of getting famous very quickly doesn't speak to that. Like, people just care about, oh, this guy's rich, so that he must know everything. And you see that to a degree with celebrities too. Oh, that guy's famous for being an actor, we should listen to him, what he thinks about green energy. You know, I don't see the connection. You know, but again, it comes back to, what is it that you value? And if you don't know what you value, you're going to fall for all sorts of things. Just like you said about the corporations getting to tell you who you are. Like, you need to sit down and think about this. You know, you can write your own narrative, but you got to sit down and pick up the pen.
Yeah.
Until that time, other people are going to be doing it for you. You know, that is that Jung quote, you know, until you make the unconscious conscious, it'll run your life and you'll call it fate. This is the time for you to sit down and take control of that.
That's powerful, man. Yeah. One thing I want to touch upon is the values thing is really important to understand who you are. Yeah, there was one thing I wanted to say. I think it was around, I don't know, it's escaped me.
That's right. Well, I'll tell you what, tell me about your experience. I mean, that was your ministry's just been. So tell me about your experience doing that. And I think that could be helpful for people that are thinking about going on one or running one.
Yeah,
You know?
I mean, yeah, I'll definitely be speaking this a lot. I think for me, it's about providing the space. Like, I don't have all the answers, and that speaks to that exactly, that holding your hand up and saying, I don't know the way, but I know what isn't the way and what isn't serving me and what is disempowering me, and what spaces pull out the kind of the shadow sides of me. It was all about creating a space, really, for men to actually talk about these things and feel heard and not feel like they're gonna be laughed at, or it's just about providing that space and owning up to that. I think what is most inspiring is just saying to people, yeah, I don't know the answer, let's figure it out. Like, we do lack these spaces, and it's so important, whether someone's listening to this and then feeling, okay, yeah, it doesn't have to be in the pub, it doesn't have to be in your normal circles. Like, it's just, there needs to be more spaces where we can talk and just dive deeper. But unless we come together and share like collective values in a space where, all right, we're just going to listen here, or we're going to see what comes up when we ask these certain questions, it's like providing those spaces. We just don't have it. It's almost like it's agendered in a way that just doesn't empower us, and that's what it's what's going to rewrite our story. And it speaks to both those paradigms that you talked about, and that's so important, and a very powerful kind of guidebook. I also want to talk about the maps, well, that's in my mind, because we need a map. We need a map. Like, it's not the territory, as we know, but a map is inherent. It's within us. We need to know what we're looking at and how we can kind of navigate through it. I think that the maps of masculinity is brilliant, because it's just like, this is one way. Like, there are many ways, but this is one way. If that resonates, then cool. Let's do some powerful work, and gain back the kind of understanding of what it means to be human, because it's not serving us. We know from the statistics, it's all negative health statistics. Men are leading the way. Whatever that feels like for you, it's really fucking radical. And unless we just start talking about it, start providing the space, start really speaking to it directly, then it's not going to change. And it is changing, and there are more spaces. That's why I'm glad you reconnected, because it's you were actually on my mind about, thinking about who was on originally. Who I normally love getting people back on, because I'd rather build that relationship with a certain few than like maximizing speak to as many as possible. I think it's like, when you believe in someone, right, what can you do in that space? And it's a powerful mission you've undertook, and it's not fucking easy. And I know that it's just, it brings out so much emotion, and then within that, that's the learning opportunity to understand why the emotion's there. And it's really important that we change the mindset around, oh, this is uncomfortable, therefore it's bad. It's
I couldn't agree more. And that is that Buddhist understanding too, right? That we run to pleasure and we run away from pain. And as a result, we just spend our lives running. And that's exactly that. What you're saying about emotions and it's emotional work. It's my first time in the men's circle. I was actually just interested. I just wanted to know what happens in them. So I didn't quite know what to expect. Got on there, and people started sharing. I thought, oh my God, my life's fine, and I feel bad now because I feel like I'm a voyeur. And then it was my turn to speak. I was like, oh, I hope I've got something to say that's bad because people are struggling. There I was, and this is where I thought the unconscious mind is smart. It will outsmart you every time. So I'm on this thing thinking I'm doing like reconnaissance about men's work here. And I start speaking, and within like a minute, I'm in floods of tears. And I was just like, things aren't okay. I'm not. I thought I was okay, and I realized I don't talk about this with any of my friends. The situation I'm in actually is far bigger than I thought it was. I'm in a dire situation, and I haven't expressed it to my girlfriend because I'm worried that she's going to worry about what happens with money. I haven't expressed that to my mom because I know she'll worry. I haven't expressed it to my brother because I don't want him to worry. And you realize I haven't said this to anyone. I've just been carrying this load around, and given the smallest opportunity in front of these other men, I'm just a mess. And probably for 5 minutes of my time was incoherent babbling. I just couldn't get out the words, but also didn't want to stop. I was like, I just want this moment. And like in many ways, that's all I needed. And I was exhausted afterwards, but I slept great. And then I felt better. And, I got my men's circle tonight. And no part of me is scared of it. And one thing I noticed in those circles is that it's an opportunity. And I would say to any men that are going to circles currently, but maybe aren't being fully honest, you're missing such an opportunity, because I see that place is not showing people who you are, but it's an opportunity to show people the worst of you and have them look at you and go, you know what, Doug, even at your worst, you're okay, man. You're still welcome here. They let you reflect on how bad you are and how acceptable you still can be, even in that moment. I thought there's so much to that. And then on the flip side of that, when other men are talking and you hear it, you're like, oh, you practice. If it could be a muscle, your empathy muscle would just be going like, you'd be, that's what's happening. My guess would be it'd be oxytocin, but you just feel this like just shutting up for an hour and just listening to other people talk and being invested in it. And I'm not sure about the other circles, but the circle I'm in, there's an opportunity to give feedback at the end, not advice, just feedback on what's happening in their life. And just saying, hey, that was really powerful what you said. I appreciate what you said there. And I feel like it's such an important opportunity to show someone. The feedback opportunity is to show them that I heard everything you said, and it's okay. And that's all that is there for. And I take so much pride in listening in those circles to know what my men are up to, what's happening in their life. Because you walk around and you don't know the stories that are happening. And you go into that room and you hear all the stories. It's so funny. I always think of Fight Club in there, which was kind of ahead of its time, because that is a story about masculinity. In many ways, what is the first thing they do? They pour that, spoiler alert from a movie 25 years ago, but they pour that lye on their hand and they burn the hand. That is a rite of passage. He holds his hand in place, says, don't you go to your special place. Stay here. Stay with that pain. This is real. This is happening to you. And he takes his hand away, and even though the water's right here, he endures it. And I was like, that's what's tough, is that concept speaks to masculinity so much. But we have to be so careful about what is that? What is that thing we're going to do? Is it going to be being in a gang, or is it going to be doing some good? And it's hard because they're equally as attractive to us. Men are very interesting. We will endure all manner of things if it's for higher good. But that higher good is up to us, and it comes back to, what is that thing? What did you desire? What is that thing that you decided was your king? What is you as a king? And if you don't know that, you're going to get pulled around by all the other kings in their kingdoms. And I just think that's such a waste, because you Chris, and any of you listeners that are there, you all are super unique. You come from a lineage of the other men that made it this far. In nature, you only see things evolutionary that are useful, that stick around. So if you're here, by virtue of that fact, you're useful. So be useful. Don't stay in the shadows. Come out, do something with your life. And it's hard because the pressure is just so much. It feels like the right thing to do sometimes to freeze, and it's not. You got to move forward. You got to go towards that ideal. And it's not easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when we share, when we hear people's radical honesty and speak to their pain, we see it in ourselves, right? I think that's the most penetrative energy. But then what we also see when we allow that is we see the champion in them, the thing that they're doing really well. We see that in ourselves as well, because then we're not in a state of just protecting ourselves anymore. We're actually connecting through our pain, but we're connecting through all the attributes to them that are like powerful, and we can see that in them. And therefore, like, the nothing is without our possibility. Of course, circumstance plays into this, but in us is everything. In every man that's ever existed, you see that. You see yourself in them. When you stare into another man's eyes and they're being honest with you, you see yourself in them, and you see their joy and you see their sorrow, but you see the power in them as well, what they hold. And that's just incredible. And when you hold yourself back, as you were saying, you hold yourself back from perhaps letting them know a side of you, you stop, you almost take their power away from actually making a decision of what's right for them. So it's like you take the permission away, for giving them permission to just accept you or not. Like, it's on them whether they do that. But if you hold something back, you're almost not giving them permission, the full story of you. Yeah. So that, how are they going to take you? They can't. They can only see that persona.
Yeah, and that is one of the few places you can really be honest, right? You can tell people all the terrible things you've been thinking. It's a real incredible opportunity. If you don't take it, you're missing out, man. Like, because trust me, some of the things you want to say, you're not going to get back and just be able to tell your girlfriend without there being some sort of pushback. There's certain things that we want to say that are not acceptable. And sometimes you need the forum to say it and hear yourself say it, that you can go, oh, that's not really good. But when it's in here, when it's in the shadows, it festers. It really has the capacity to do what it wants. You want to bring it out. And that is Jungian shadow work. It's that concept of bring it out into the light. It just wants to be seen. With a little bit of sunlight, you'll be surprised how much goes away. And each one of those shadows has a power to it and the energy, and you want to unlock it. You don't want to repress it. You don't want to just hold it back there. And that's what I found interesting. It's weird. These two things were happening simultaneously. I was doing the men's group and finding the stuff out, and that's that idea of like, wait a minute, that's exactly what he was speaking about. I'm expressing my shadow in here, and as a result, it's getting bathed.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Yeah, it's powerful work, and thank you for taking that path. It's
so interesting that I connect with you.
I
And
know.
you say, I got a men's retreat this week. I was like, what is happening?
I know, man. Where can people find you? Like, when the retreats in October?
Yeah, retreats in October is 6th to the 9th. Like I said, they'll be in Bournemouth. It's pretty cool. It looks like almost like an army barracks, but it's like a glamping fixed structure. Or bunk beds. Some of them have double beds, depending on which one you want. But it's got a kitchen, a hot tub. But there'll be daily yoga, meditation, breath work to embody certain aspects of the archetypes, which we'll go through. We'll talk about these archetypes. We'll discuss these things. We'll eat together. I got a friend, very cool chef from an old studio I used to work at. And then we'll put all these things into action. So every archetype will have an action involved, and we're going to embody what we just learned in some sort of action, so that you can take home these toolkits and go, I feel like I'm not embodying my precocious child that much. How do I get more of that? And you'll know straight away what we're doing with that. And all this time you'll be journaling and reflecting. And that really, as I did that, I was like, oh yeah, that's who I used to be. I used to love that stuff. And when you're not asked this question, you don't do it. Anyway, then we'll go to the British Special Forces. We'll do the gun work. That'll be super fun. Everyone that does that is always like, that's amazing, because it's just so far removed from what we get to do. So that'll be 6th and 9th in Bournemouth. And then if you want to check out specifically my men's work, it's Maps of the Masculine on Instagram. And it'd be great to have you there. Leave comments. I leave lots of posts about questions and things like that. Just like you say, I'm learning just as much as most people. So I'm there to ask questions and listen, as well as to tell you what I've learned. And through that, hopefully we can all learn a bit more.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much for speaking to all this. It's been powerful, man. And you're doing powerful work. You're a powerful guy. Just let it flow. Yeah, I see you, man. It's incredible. I love it.
Chris,
Can't,
thanks so much, man. Good to be back.
yes. Can't wait to see it all unfold
Mhm.
as it's meant to. All right, man. Cool. Appreciate it.
Take it easy, buddy. Enjoy. Bye bye.